Hi, and welcome to this Vaadin webinar about domain-driven design. My name is Petter Holmström and I work as a Vaadin Architect.
And my name is Rolf Smeds and I work as a UX designer.
Yeah, and when we are building software, at least hopefully there's actually some kind of a real-world problem that you're trying to solve with your software. And in order to be able to solve that problem, we're going to need to somehow turn that problem into a model, an abstract model that we can then implement in our program and use to actually solve this problem and bring value for the customer. And domain-driven design, or DDD for short, it's one way of actually building this model. And DDD as a concept, it should be pretty well known. There are a lot of material about it on the internet. There is a really good book about the subject. There are also several free articles. So in terms of the theory, I'll just have to refer you to those resources. So we're not going to talk much about the theory behind DDD during this webinar. Instead, we're going to go hands-on.
Yeah, so we're actually going to be reenacting an actual discussion, an actual domain design and analysis workflow that we did in an actual project not too long ago. And for this, Petter is going to be acting as the domain expert.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be acting as the designer or business analyst, as the role is usually called.
Yeah. And the situation that we're going to act out is actually it's a software for a dentist reception, and we've simplified it quite a bit. So this isn't it's based on a real problem, but we've simplified it and shortened it so that we can fit it into this webinar and so that you can follow us even without the necessary background knowledge. And so basically the problem that we're going to solve, the business problem, is how to get paid after an appointment.
Yeah.
So time to put on our actor hats and let's get going.
So, domain expert. Like any good cooking show, we've already prepared the diagram with two entities, the patient and the appointment entity. The appointment entity only has a date and the patient has a name. This is the starting point for our analysis and domain design process. So, we want to get billed for this appointment. So obviously we're going to be sending an invoice.
Yeah.
So let's add an invoice entity here. Like so. And the invoice obviously should have an amount.
Yeah.
And it should it should have a reference to the appointment for which we're billing. Like so.
Yeah, and we're also going to need a claim, an insurance claim, because some patients might have insurance and then we will want to bill them as well.
Okay, so we'll first of all have to add insurance because the patient doesn't have any insurance at the moment. So we'll add insurance as a separate entity. Like so. And the patient is going to have an insurance. So there's a reference from the patient to the insurance. And we're going to be sending a claim. With an amount like the insurance, like the invoice, and a reference to the appointment. And the claim also, of course, needs to have a reference to the insurance company.
Yeah.
So, what strikes me here is that it seems like claims and invoices are very similar entities, in fact.
Yeah, they are both kind of receivables.
Yeah, they're both different types of receivables. So to simplify the model a bit, we can actually change it a bit so that instead of having a totally separate claim and invoice entity, we're going to combine them with an entity called a receivable. Which will have an amount. And we'll have to change this model a bit so that we move this reference like so. Excuse me. And also the invoice will be moved like so, and we'll make the invoice and the claim subtypes of a receivable. So in Java terms, this is kind of like subclassing.
And in this case, if we were to be talking to a real domain expert that doesn't really know anything about software development, we'd probably need to point out what this subclass means and what that field arrow means.
Yeah.
But we can assume we already had that discussion, so let's move on.
Yeah. So obviously, I'm removing the amount property from the claim and invoice because it's already included in the receivable superclass. All right. So then, the amount then for the invoice and the claim, where do we get that from?
Yeah, well, it works like this. When we had this appointment, we will take the appointment fee and we're gonna send that in the insurance claim to the insurance company. And then after a while, they will reimburse something, probably not the entire sum. And then we're just gonna calculate the difference between the reimbursement and the appointment fee, and then we're gonna send that sum to the patient in an invoice.
Okay, so the invoice amount will essentially be whatever is left of the appointment fee after the insurance reimbursement.
Yes.
Okay, so the appointment fee was mentioned. Let's add a property for the appointment fee to the appointment entity first of all. I just noticed I forgot to remove that arrow. Okay, like so. So, where does this fee come from? How do we calculate?
Yeah, well, the fee is actually based on procedures. So when a patient comes in for an appointment, the dentist or doctor will perform different procedures, and each procedure has a specific fee, and then you just sum them up, and then you get the appointment fee. All
right. So in fact, the appointment fee is based on a number of procedures. So we can actually remove the appointment fee from the appointment, and we can add instead a procedure entity that has a fee, and the appointment has a reference to one or more procedures.
Yeah.
Like so.
Yeah, and actually a procedure also has a code because we need to include the procedure codes in the claim.
Oh, okay, so the claim actually needs to have a set of procedure codes. Like so. And so we'll need a corresponding property in the procedure. Like so.
Yeah.
Now that we're talking about things that the claim will need to include, is there anything else?
We're also going to need the doctor's name and license number.
Okay, doctor's name and license number. Now we don't actually have a doctor yet in this model, so let's add him as well. Let's put him right here. And he has a name and a license number, like so.
Yeah.
And the patient has a reference to the doctor, like so.
Okay, so only one doctor per patient?
Does the patient need to have multiple doctors?
Well, yeah, the patient can see many different doctors,
course.
but only one per appointment.
Okay, then in that case, it seems like we can actually remove the reference from the patient to the doctor, and instead make a reference from the appointment to the doctor.
Yeah,
we can quantify that with a 1 because there's only one doctor per appointment.
That looks about right. By the way, a doctor can actually have more than one license.
Oh, okay. Then if there's more than one license per doctor, we clearly need to model the license as a separate entity. So let's add one here. Like so. And the license has a number like we already talked about. Like so. And let's remove the license number from the doctor entity. So you said it could be, you have to have one license,
at least
obviously.
One. Otherwise, he can't work as a doctor.
Yeah, that would be too bad.
Yeah.
So it's 1 to n basically.
Yeah.
Okay, so but let me see. If the claim needs to have exactly one license number, and the doctor can have multiple license numbers, then how do we choose which one to use?
Yeah, that again depends on the procedures. So the procedures that has been performed during the appointment, they determine which type of license we can use.
Okay, so there are different types of license.
Yeah.
And obviously, instead of modeling the license type as a property of the license, I think we should model it as a separate entity because obviously different licenses will belong to the same type. Like so, license type. So each license belongs to one type, and each procedure is associated with one license type.
Actually, a procedure can be built with many different license types.
Oh, okay. So this is actually 1 to n again.
Yeah.
But now we're back to the original problem again. If a procedure can be built using multiple license types, and the doctor can have multiple license types, how do we know which license to include in the claim?
Well, that again depends on the procedures because some insurance reimbursements are higher for different license types than others. So the same procedure, depending on which license type we use in the insurance claim, we can actually get different reimbursements.
Oh, okay.
And obviously we want to maximize the reimbursement, so we want to select the license type that will give us the biggest reimbursement.
Yeah. But we don't actually know the reimbursements for each.
No.
Okay.
That's still something that is up to the insurance company.
Yeah, but we do know which license types will give us the best.
Yeah, that we know.
And which will give us the next best, and so on.
Yes, we will know that.
So we actually want to rank the license types for each procedure.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's modify this association here a bit. So instead of just having a simple association from procedure to license type, we'll make it a ranked association. So we'll add a rank here, and the rank will be actually have a reference to the license type. So this way, for each procedure, we have a ranked list of license types. So when we build the claim, we pick the license whose type has the highest rank for the procedures that make up the appointment.
Yeah. This model is starting to look quite complex. There's a lot of boxes and arrows. What would the actual application look like? I mean, especially in terms of editing those ranks and procedures. What would it look like?
We actually have it already prepared, so let's have a look at the UI sketch for that. So we have a procedure UI with a list of procedures with a code, a fee, and a list of license type ranked. And for each procedure, you build the list of ranked license types by selecting them from the list on the left in this highlighted area, and add them to the list on the right.
Okay. I just you see there's going to be like thousands of those procedures.
Thousands?
Yeah. And well, I wouldn't want to be the guy who needs to actually enter all the licenses for each procedure. There's a lot of clicks and a big risk of making mistakes.
So we're actually talking thousands of these procedures.
And we want to get those license types right, because we can actually lose money if we get them wrong.
Yeah, I see. So the problem here is that it's a bit too much work to manage the ranked list of license types for every single one of the thousands of procedures we have. Okay, so let's see if we can simplify this somehow. Do many procedures have the same ranked list of license types?
Yeah, actually, there are like 5 or so different combinations of license types that we normally use.
Okay. So that sounds to me like we could probably categorize the procedures into categories, just 5 or so categories, and specify the ranked list of license types for the categories instead of for every single procedure individually.
Yeah, it might be something like that. What would it look like?
Let's have a look at that. So that will mean that we have 2 separate UIs, one for managing the procedures on the left, where we only specify the category instead of building the ranked list of license types. And on the right, we have the procedure category UI, where we specify the ranked list of license types for each of those 5 or so categories.
Yeah, this looks a lot more manageable than the previous one. So back to those domain model with the boxes and arrows. We probably need to change that as well.
We need to change that a bit, yeah. So let's have a look. Let's remove the rank from the procedures then, and instead add a new entity here that will be the procedure category. Like so. And so each procedure belongs to, whoops, that arrow went in the wrong direction. Each procedure belongs to one category, and each category has a ranked list of license types.
Yeah.
Like so.
Yeah, now it's starting to look good. So now we just need to get the payments.
Yeah, so we build a claim and we select the license that corresponds to the license type with the highest rank in the procedure category of the procedures that make up the appointment.
Yeah.
Okay, so we send the claim, and sooner or later we should get a payment. With an amount from the insurance company, and the payment will be associated with the claim. That is a payment for.
Yeah.
And once we receive that payment, we will create an invoice with the amount that is the difference between the claim payment amount and the appointment fee.
Yeah. So I think we have all the entities that we need to solve this problem now.
Yeah.
And there's one part that's still missing that we're not covering here. We've just discussed about it, and that's the sort of dynamics. So all these algorithms, for example, for selecting the correct license type and so on. But we're not going to talk about that right now. But I just want to point out that you probably want to pay some attention to the dynamic parts as well.
Yeah.
And there are a few things that we wanted to show with this sketch. We deliberately picked a certain real world sort of revelations that have actually helped us to discover potential problems and make the domain model better. So if you have some.
Yeah, so basically what we have found is that domain modeling, doing a domain analysis like this, like we showed you today, and modeling the domain as a diagram is incredibly useful for gathering requirements because domain analysis clearly is part of the requirements gathering process. And for doing functional specifications because explaining the domain in which this functionality needs to happen in the form of a domain model is obviously very useful. It also facilitates communication between team members and between the stakeholders, like the domain experts, the customers, the users, the developers, and the designers. Because instead of having to explain everything from the beginning every single time you discuss some part of the domain with them or some part of the functionality, you can just look at the domain model together with them, and everybody doesn't have to keep like the domain model in their heads because they have it in front of them. Also, the names of the entities and properties act as a form of glossary for the project so that everybody can use the same terminology.
Yeah.
Which helps to avoid confusion and clear things up quite a bit.
Yeah, and it also another point that we discovered is that if you end up in a situation where the sort of real world problem is difficult to actually explain in language because we don't have the necessary terms, then that's a good indication that the domain model is missing something, and then we need to figure out what that something is.
Yeah, a lot of times also you need to actually invent new terminology that doesn't really exist in the real world domain. And the domain model is the perfect place to record that terminology as well.
Yeah.
And finally, the domain model is also incredibly useful for UI design because usually most of the entities and properties that end up in the domain model will also need to be represented somehow in the user interface. And as you saw in today's example, sometimes you might realize something in the UI design that needs to change and which will actually affect the domain model, like our addition of the procedure category, which we wouldn't have done if it wasn't for the rather cumbersome task of defining the license type lists for every single procedure.
Yeah. So if we had only needed to be able to manage, like, let's say, tens of procedure, the first design would have been acceptable.
Yeah.
But when it went up to thousands, things changed.
Yeah.
And this is also something that's worth remembering whenever you're designing either user interfaces or the domain model is think about how many of these items are you going to need, and especially how you're going to edit them. Because I've seen many times these really, really fancy user interfaces for editing a single item. So you just need to click there, and then you fill in this, and then you fill that, and then you click that, and everything is very easy. And yes, it's easy for one, but when you need to do that 1,000 times, your priorities might be different.
Exactly. So the takeaway from that is that the domain analysis process also involves UI design, and it's basically not a linear process. It's more like an iterative process, like so much in software design tends to be, where you're talking to the domain expert and you're modeling the domain as a diagram, and you're also doing some quick UI sketches to figure out how things will work in the UI. And each of those parts actually affect the other parts. So that UI design affects, can affect what you're talking about with the domain expert. The main expert tells you things that affect the domain model and vice versa, basically.
Yeah.
So it's a cyclical process.
Yeah. And the more you think about both the UI and the entity in an early stage of the project, the easier it will be to actually get these requirements right. Of course, you can make mistakes, but we found that this is a process that actually works, and we've used it. This isn't just some kind of academic made-up model. It's actually really useful. We have used it in real-world projects with, in my opinion, really good success as well.
Yeah, I think we would have been quite lost without domain modeling.
Yeah. Especially in complex systems.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to actually prove to you that this isn't just theory, we've actually implemented this model in Java. So you can see the URL here behind us. It's on GitHub, a sample application. It's a Spring Boot application. You can just download it and run it. And now if I can get my laptop there, thank you. So this is the application when it's running. So it has some rough edges. We've left out several things that probably should be in a production application. But you can see we got editing of procedure categories. We got the list builder over here. We've got procedures over here, where we can actually edit procedures. Here we can select the procedure category. And then of course we got appointments, so lots of appointments. We can select one, open it. Here we can see the patient detail. Here's the insurance. This is all taken from the database. And we got the doctor here. The doctor's got multiple licenses. Here's the appointment. And here are the procedures that we carried out during this appointment with the codes and the fees. We can see the total down here. And behind me is a button, create and send claim. It will actually create this claim. It selected this first license over here as the best one. And here's the amount, which is the total appointment fee. Then again, I can record a payment. Let's say they choose to reimburse $150. So now it's recorded as a payment over here. And then I can send out an invoice, which is the remaining sum. And then I can record a payment. And now we're down to 0. So obviously, it's nothing that would be usable in real world, but this is actually a concrete Java-based implementation of our domain model. And by looking at this example and by looking at this webinar, you can hopefully get some ideas of how you can translate your abstract domain modeling form into working Java code or whatever language it is you're using, because obviously you can do this domain-driven development with any language. Before we end, I just want to point out one thing. When you're actually doing this domain modeling, you're drawing the diagrams, you're talking with a domain expert who doesn't really know much about software development. So leave out the technical stuff. So don't worry about the class structure, how you're actually going to implement stuff. Don't worry about the database structures, how you're actually going to save stuff. Keep it simple. Talk about the domain concepts and their relationships, and then afterwards we can figure out how to actually map that into code, and then we probably need to change some things here and there to be able to get it stored, for example, in a relational database.
Yeah. Usually the differences are surprisingly small, actually.
They are.
Yeah.
And so I can see that we don't have any questions, and since we don't have any questions, this is all, folks. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope this will be useful in your future projects. So goodbye.
Bye.